Okay, let's go.
Hello, I'm Danny Sriskandarajah, Secretary General of Civicus, the World Alliance for Citizen Participation. Greetings from Johannesburg, South Africa, where I am this week. I really wish I could be with you in person for the World Volunteer Conference. I know that you have an exciting and important agenda this week, but I wanted to send my apologies that I can't be there in person. I have to be here in Johannesburg for some very important internal meetings that we couldn't move away from this week. So I hope you will be satisfied with this short video message to tell you about a few things that are important to Civicus and I hope will help challenge and inspire you during the World Volunteer Conference. Civicus, as I hope some of you will know, is a global alliance of civil society. We were created 25 years ago as a membership body, a platform, an umbrella at the global level to strengthen citizen action and civil society. Our responsibility is to help make the argument again and again for why civil society is an integral and critical part of any good society. A healthy democracy needs a healthy civil society. Sustainable development needs civil society. Happiness needs civil society. Because at the end of the day, we as human beings are social animals. We connect with each other in so many different ways. Sometimes we connect because we have to, because the state compels us to, because we're obliged to. Sometimes we connect in the marketplace because we're transacting business, we're trying to make money. But so much of what it means to be a human is about connecting in what we often call the voluntary sector. The sector that doesn't need to exist. It's not compelled by government or the market, but instead is about people coming together in communities, in organizations, through collective action. It's this form or these multiple forms of civil society that are at the heart of the good life. And of course, fundamental to all of that is the notion of volunteering. And that's why I really wish I could have been with you for your few days of fascinating discussion. I wanted to talk about three important things from the Civicus experience that I hope will help shape your own discussions during the conference. The first is around civic space. The second is around the building blocks of citizen action. And the third is the importance of building bridges. Civic space, building blocks, and building bridges. On civic space, we live in some really worrying times from my perspective. I've been in this job for 6 years, and when I started as Secretary General of Civicus, I thought that we had won the argument for why civil society mattered. You know, there was agreement after agreement at the international level and at the national level that protected our fundamental freedoms. And yet over these 6 years, my colleagues and I have been documenting an ever worsening trend almost in every country of the world when it comes to civic space. We live in an era, a dark and dangerous era when it comes to civic freedoms. If you look at our tool, the Civicus Monitor, you'll see that many countries around the world have worsening condition when it comes to the three basic civic freedoms: the freedom of assembly, the freedom of association, and the freedom of expression. In fact, several billion of us live in countries where we believe civic space is repressed or closed. And in more than 100 countries last year, including in some very mature democracies, we've had conditions for civil society deteriorating. We've seen direct attacks on citizen activists, especially those who are protecting the environment, speaking out on land rights, promoting gender justice. Those who speak truth to power are being attacked and killed in many parts of the world. We're also seeing organizations in civil society having their life made much more difficult through regulation and bureaucracy. Governments introducing measures that are aimed at slowing down life in civil society, or in many cases, closing down the access to resources, particularly foreign funding, which has become a popular restriction for many governments around the world. And of course, we're also seeing in many parts of the world the demonization of civil society, particularly civil society that is involved in advocacy or campaigning. And so for all of these reasons, I think we live in an era when we have to think about how are we going to push back to make the case for why an independent, vocal, resilient civil society is incredibly important. And I think we're seeing this global emergency on civic space, and the onus is on us, including all of you at the conference, to think about what can we do to push back, to promote civic space, to protect civil society and our fundamental freedoms. Well, the second thing I wanted to talk to you about links very closely to the first, and that's going back to the fundamental building blocks of citizen action. At Civicus, we work a lot with civil society organizations, particularly those who have formal registration, who have paid staff, who have complex bureaucracy, and in many cases, large brands. And when we work with our partners, my observation is that sometimes we end up forgetting about the importance of volunteer citizen action. That actually, it's important to talk about what happens in the meeting rooms or the boardrooms, but it's equally important to think through how we support citizen action in the communities, on the streets. And we need to, in fact, connect these two very coherently going forward if we are to push back on civic space and strengthen citizen action. I think this is the time when we need to support all of the diversity of civil society. Of course, we need to protect the enabling environment for civil society organizations, but we also need to protect the environment for citizen action, including for volunteering. Now that involves, for example, thinking about how we make sure that the fundamentals of voluntary action are protected, aren't simply co-opted by governments who have, in times of austerity, who see volunteers as a cheap way of doing things. We also have to protect voluntary action from being co-opted by the bigger, more resource bits of civil society, non-profits who see volunteers as an extension of their own organization. We have to see voluntary action, of citizen action, as a good in itself. And in fact, if we want to protect civil society, then we have to promote the rights, the freedoms, the environment, the confidence that we all have to take voluntary action and to use that as a building block, not just in our resistance, but in building a more vibrant civil society around the world. And of course, it goes without saying that the sorts of conversations you're having at the World Volunteer Conference are going to be critical to thinking through what those building blocks are and how we connect, how we bridge the gaps between the big and the small, the better resourced and those who don't need resources, and of course between North and South and different parts of the world. And that brings me to the third thing I wanted to mention, which is about the importance of building bridges. And I know that at the heart of the IAVE is this notion of building bridges across the world. And I think here we are in 2018, once again needing to pay attention to how we build bridges between communities, between countries. Because as we see the retreat into nationalism, the retreat into populism, the support, the growing support for extremist visions of our societies and our communities, and for those divisions that we're seeing across many countries around the world, I think it's the responsibility of us in civil society to build bridges, to protect against division, to provide a touch of healing, to connect people, to convince people that we are in this together, that we cannot divide our societies, divide our communities. And all of the research that we've done and many others have done suggests that civil society holds the key to those building those bridges, because it's at the smallest level, civil society action, community organization, voluntary action that binds communities together, that allows people to talk about, sometimes argue about, their vision of the future, but in doing so, building the social capital that keeps us together. And of course, at the complete other end of the spectrum, when it comes to the big global challenges that face us, whether it's growing economic inequality, the fight to protect our planet from dangerous climate change, or a whole range of other global challenges, we're not going to have any chance of addressing those successfully unless we build citizen action in support of those, that we build from below but beyond borders, so that we can have concerted popular pressure to take constructive action on those fronts and to stop this retreat into nationalism. And so I hope you can spend some of your time thinking through how we go back almost to those founding principles of the IAVE, and how we can make sure that through voluntary action, through civic action, we can make sure that we can build positive bridges across people, across communities, across countries, in a way that binds us together and solves some of those global challenges around the world. So those are the three themes that I think are important, certainly in the life of Civicus: protecting civic space, ensuring that we get the building blocks of citizen action right, and that we can build bridges towards progressive, internationalist, constructive solutions to the challenges that we see around the world. Let me finish by inviting you to have a look at the resources that Civicus has. We produce a lot of research like the Civicus Monitor, or indeed lots of reports that look at questions like how to promote an inclusive vision of the world, or indeed our latest report, which is on reimagining democracy, and how we have the opportunity here to think through a democracy that puts citizens at its heart, how we can build an everyday liquid democracy for the 21st century that starts with civic action and citizens, and then builds a new set of institutions around them. Because at the end of the day, I think the rest of the 21st century will be the century of the citizen. It might not feel like it when we look at what's happening around the world, the decline in democracies, the attacks on civic freedoms, the rise in populism. But I'm convinced that we have the tools, we have the techniques, we have the need for us to build this progressive internationalism that can make this the century of the citizen. You know, for most of humanity, we were subjects, treated by those in power, the chiefs, the kings, the queens, as simply subjects. For the last few hundred years, we've moved to think of ourselves as consumers, slave often to the market, and where our consumer identity, we've been told, is what's most important. But we see where that's getting us now, the trouble that we find ourselves in. And so I think the logical conclusion is that the next few decades need to be about the century of the citizen. We need to reclaim democracy. We need to design political institutions and civic institutions that put citizen action at their heart. And so, as you are discussing over these next few days and having very important debates, I hope you don't forget that your struggle, that our struggle, is to make this the century of the citizen. It's no less important than that. I wish you well in your discussions, and apologies once again that I can't be there with you in person. Thank you very much.